Ravi. Leeches, I say, as everyone leans closer to see what I have in my jar. Yesterday Peripa and I took a walk together. Where are we going? I asked him. You'll see, he said. Ever since we moved to New Jersey, Peripa has been very quiet. He eats his meals without a word, then goes and sits on the sofa to chew his betel nuts and read his newspapers. But yesterday as we walked together, he had a lot to say. What's this I hear about you wanting to quit school? He asked. Nobody likes me, I told him. They think I smell bad. It doesn't matter what they think. Quitting is not an option. I know, I said. Appa told me. That's because I told your father the same thing when he was a boy, and someday when you have children of your own, you'll tell them too. Quitting is not an option. You don't understand, I said. Nobody does. For a while we walked in silence. Did you know that in India tea has to be plucked by hand, Ravi? My grandfather said finally. 3 leaves and a bud, right from the very top of the tea bush. The tea pluckers pick the tender shoots and drop them into baskets that hang from their heads. When I was a young man, my first job was to work at the tea plantation. I had to stand in the rain and guard the workers, protecting them from wild animals that might be lurking nearby. What kind of wild animals? I asked, but my grandfather didn't answer. Instead, he took me by the hand and led me through the tall grass to the edge of the pond Amma and Perima were always warning me not to go near. What are we doing here? I asked. Again, my grandfather didn't answer. He bent his knees and crouched down, careful not to let his veshti touch the muddy ground. I crouched down beside him and watched as he dipped the tea strainer in the water and began dragging it very slowly through the weeds at the edge of the pool. 2 times he pulled the strainer out, and we peered in only at dirt and dead leaves. But on the 3rd try his efforts were made with success. 3 long black worm-like creatures wriggled in the strainer. We used to call them Draculas in disguise, Peripa told me. The tea plantations were infested with them during the monsoon season. They were much larger than these skinny fellows, but these will have to do. Do for what? I asked. Perima told me about your assignment. The assignment is to find something that represents who I am, I told my grandfather. Do you think I'm a leech? Peripa laughed and pulled a small glass jar from his pocket. Fill this to the top with water, he said, handing it to me. When I had finished filling the jar, he dropped the leeches in, closed the cap, and tightened it. These leeches are a reminder of who we are and where we've come from, Ravi, and of all the hardships we've endured to get here. I thought about our house in Bangalore and my friends back at Vidya Mandir, especially Pramod. I thought about the way things used to be, the way I used to be. I don't know who I am anymore, Peripa, I told my grandfather. You are Ravi Surinani Rinanan, my grandfather said, putting his arm around me and pulling me close. And the Surinans never give up. We work hard against all odds and believe in ourselves. Who would have thought that I, a small tea plantation owner, would be able to send his son to a fine university and help bring his whole family to live in America too? But that is what happened. I miss Bangalore, I said softly. Me too, but you will have many opportunities here. It doesn't feel like home, I told him. Give it time, Peripa said, reaching for my hand. Come, Ravi. Amma and Perima are waiting. If we stay out any longer, they'll think we've been carried off by that terrible wind Perima is always complaining about. Everyone in room 506 is still crowded around my desk, trying to get a look at the leeches. This time is right, so I open my pencil box and take out the blue candy, the one Miss Frost gave me in the resource room 2 days ago. I put it in my desk and forgot about it until this morning. Now this little blue candy is about to play the starring role in my big plan. I look around to make sure no one is watching. Then I place the candy in the glass dish on Bigfoot's desk. Chapter 38, Joe. I can't believe my eyes. I actually blink a couple of times to make sure I'm not seeing things. Is there really a blue peanut M&M sitting in the glass dish on my desk? The answer is yes, but what's weird is that it's not the same one I brought from home. I'm positive. That was a single, this is a double. Those are rare, especially the blue ones, which is how I know who put it there. Chapter 39, Ravi. "I'll get us started," said Mrs. Beam as she reaches into the basket. She pulls out a card and reads it aloud. "On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law." "That's easy," shouts Dylan, jumping out of his seat. "It's Selina. Who else would be dorky enough to still be a Girl Scout in 5th grade?" Mrs. Beam's eyebrows are twitching. "As I explained a moment ago, Mr. Samreen," she says, "the person who reads the sentence is the only one who's allowed to guess. In this case, that person would be me, not you." Dylan sits back down, and Mrs. Beam walks over to Selina's desk. She is the girl in the green uniform who has brought my things to the nurse's office. "Is it you, Selina?" Mrs. Beam asks, placing the card next to a loop of green cloth with medals and badges pinned to it. Selina blushes and nods her head. "Now it's your turn," says Mrs. Beam, holding the basket out to her. Selina pulls out a card and reads, "Blondes have more fun." "Gee, I wonder who that could be," Dylan says. Selina walks over to Lucy Mulligan and places the card next to the silver hairbrush sitting on her desk. "Is it you?" she asks Lucy. Duh," Dylan sneers. "Of course it's her. This game is a joke." Mrs. Beam frowns at him, then holds out the basket to Lucy, who reaches in and pulls out the next card. "I rule," she reads. "I'll give you a hint," says Dylan. He turns on his ridiculous plastic star, and the music starts blaring. "Ghetto superstar, that is what you are." Dylan jumps up on his chair, sticks out his long tongue, and starts waving it to the music. The way it moves reminds me of the leeches wriggling in Peripa's tea strainer. Mrs. Beam's eyebrows are not twitching any longer. They've become a straight line now. She walks over and turns off the music. "Please get down from your chair," she says. As Dylan starts to climb down, he happens to glance over at Bigfoot's desk. When he sees the blue candy in the bowl, his eyes grow very wide and a look of pure shock comes over his face. Yes. Chapter 40, Joe. "Do you know who the card belongs to?" Mrs. Beam asks Lucy. Lucy nods but doesn't move. "Is something the matter, Lucy?" asks Mrs. Beam. "I don't want to see the leeches," she whispers. "What's so scary about a couple of stupid old worms?" sneers Dylan. Ever since Mrs. Beam shut down his superstar routine, he's been acting kind of grumpy. Lucy gives him a dirty look. Hallelujah. Maybe this means the wedding is off. Ravi has his hand up. "Yes, Ravi," says Mrs. Beam. I notice she says his name right for the first time, with the accent on the second syllable. "Could you please tell Lucy Mulligan that the lid on the jar is screwed on very tight? My grandfather and I made sure of that. The leeches will not escape. Nothing to worry about. See?" He lifts the jar and turns it upside down. No water leaks out, but turning the jar over like that gets the leeches all freaked out, and they start wriggling around even more than before. I expect Lucy to start screaming again, but instead she walks over and tosses the card down on Dylan's desk without even looking at him. Then she turns and smiles at Ravi. "I didn't know you knew my name," she says, tilting her head to one side. I look at Dylan to see what he's making of this disgustingly mushy moment, but he isn't paying any attention to Lucy. He's got his eyes glued to the jar of leeches. I know that look. I've seen it a million times before. Chapter 41, Ravi. "It's your turn to pick a card," says Mrs. Beam, holding the basket out to Dylan. He groans. "This game is so lame. What's the point? You can't even win." "Try to muster a bit more enthusiasm, will you, please?" says Mrs. Beam. "Not every game has to be about winning." If you ask me, Dylan's getting off easy. Mrs. Aaron would have made him kneel down on the floor or sit facing the wall if he had talked back to her like that. Dylan makes a big show of swirling his hand in the basket to stir up the cards. His overacting is even worse than Shakti Kapoor's. I can't believe I ever wanted to be his friend. "Abracadabra," he says, pulling out a card and waving it in the air like he's done something special. Nobody responds, not even Lucy Mulligan, who is busy staring at me for some reason. Dylan shakes his hair out of his eyes and reads what is written on the card. Quitting is not an option. He rolls his eyes. Gee, I wonder who this could be. Then he marches straight over to Tim or Jim, I still don't know which it is, and puts the card down on his desk. "Is it you?" Dylan asks, in a voice that says he is confident his guess is correct. Nope, says Tim Jim, shaking his head. It's not me. Dylan can't believe his ears. What do you mean it's not you? He says. It has to be you. Everybody knows you're the kid who just won't quit. Tim Jim looks at him and shrugs. It's not me, he says. You see, Mrs. Beam's pistachio eyes are twinkling like little green stars. Maybe this game isn't so easy after all. Well, if he didn't write it, who did? Asked Dylan, looking around the room. I wink at him and smile. I did, I say.